everybody's scared shitless of djinn, and they should be. There is a reason why they are so frightening. And please excuse my language, but seriously, they can fuck you up. So there's this delicate balance, I believe, as a magician one must take. I suppose, for example, in the Goetia, we are used to, at least the way I do it, you take on power, you assume high authority, and you perhaps use the angels to constrain them, and then you command from a place of power. With the djinn, it's not usually advisable to bully and command. I won't use the word bully because I don't really even bully the demons. I just politely command. But with the djinn, it is vastly different.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we welcome back the wonderful Mademoiselle Vendredi for the third time on the show. Now, her previous episodes centered around her use of glamour magic, her expertise in servitors, and the use of sigils. But today we're going to focus on her work in djinn sorcery. And she has some fascinating insight and some hair-raising tales to go with it in today's show. So we'll be getting into the aforementioned djinn work. We'll be talking about her experiments in Abramelin square magic and working with the forbidden grimoire of Harut and Marut, a book said to be written by the Egyptian sorcerer Al-Toukh. We also get into a recent brush with a djinn-possessed person that Mademoiselle Vendredi had, which, as you can imagine, was pretty nerve-wracking. Staying with the theme of djinn, our guest gives her account of her recent trip to the city of djinns, India's Delhi, and her visit to Feroz Shah Kotla, the fifth city of Delhi, ancient Ferozabad, the citadel of Ferozabad, which is known to be inhabited by 10,000 djinns. To close out the show, we get an insight as to what it's like to practice magic in a country where it is strictly forbidden and indeed punishable by jail time and in some cases death. An important consideration for those of us who don't have to deal with that kind of punishment. In the Plus show, we continue that thread about danger and practicing magic in the Middle East. As a result of that kind of looming danger, Mademoiselle Vendredi talks us through the strategies that she's used to develop and kind of adapt her magical practice to not have any written materials around her. So memorising sigils, memorising incantations, all of that kind of work. And indeed, the importance of servitors and servitor magic in camouflaging her magical activities from prying eyes that may do her harm. And we get into the intensity of the aftermath of djinn magic and the difference between working with demons and working with djinns, and how there are waves of after effects working with djinn that are particularly distinct from working with, say, the Goetia. It's fascinating stuff, and as wonderful and as usual, Madame Vendredi is charming as she is knowledgeable. If you want to hear the Plus show, simple way to do it is come and join the Patreon, where you can hear the extended shows, the Plus shows, and get a host of other benefits. Now, to close out, it would be remiss of me not to mention that Mademoiselle Vendredi will be running a djinn workshop, introducing people to the principles of sorcery and the djinn. And in this workshop, and it's absolutely jam-packed with stuff, it really is, she'll be covering the history and origins of the djinn, tribes and types, the categories, the Burhatia conjuration, the 7 djinn kings, their corresponding days of the week, techniques for conjuring, the demon bowl, the 7 seals of Solomon, Harut and Marut ritual, which we touch on in the show. And she'll also get into kind of some of the legends around Belquis and one's Kareen. It's, that's definitely not a 1-hour workshop. That's a lot of stuff, and one that I will be taking up myself. You can find the relevant links to the relevant places in the show notes, so be sure to get on to that one, because I imagine that will sell out pretty quick. Okay, let's get on with the show. I feel strange welcoming you to the Spirit Box, given that we're always chatting. So, but you're welcome again. How are you?
Here I am once again. Mademoiselle Vendredi returns. Third charm,
Third
literally.
time the charm, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's fantastic to have you back on the show. And when was the first one? 2 years ago.
The very first one was 2 years ago,
Yeah,
and as you and I were discussing
yeah,
just before you came on, you didn't even know what I looked like. I refused to show my face,
yeah.
uh, and there was some initial, I won't say mistrust, but definitely when you first reached out to me, it was like, who is this person? What do they want? And then of course, pretty
Yeah,
pretty quickly realized that you had an awesome podcast, and yeah, that was the first time.
yeah, absolutely. And God, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that it wasn't easy. You know, speaking to a blank screen.
Well, I did kind of feel sorry for you, but at the same time, obviously it was the very first time I was, quote
Yeah,
unquote, coming out onto the scene. In
yeah,
fact, I credit you all the time for being the person that actually sort of dragged me into notoriety. I won't use the word fame, but notoriety at least.
yeah,
And
yeah. Fantastic.
you sort of gave me that start. And then from
Mm,
your very first podcast with me,
mm,
or episode, I started getting a lot of inquiries, and then it sort of
mhm.
just snowballed
Yeah,
from there. So yeah,
fantastic, fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have you back, and we're going to go through a whole range of different things today,
much.
different subject matters, and obviously kind of picking up with your latest work, your kind of your recent kind of exploration into various different fields of magical execution. I know a lot of people know you for your servitor work and your sigil work. Um, and I must say, I've been on, I was on your first sigil course. Um,
Yes, you
yeah,
were.
yeah,
Mhm.
and it's really, really good stuff. And I do actually, I do use it. I refer back to it quite frequently whenever the need arises. Um, so I'm
Well,
really interested
that,
to
that,
hear about you.
that's a pretty ringing endorsement, I should say. And that makes me sound amazing, but obviously, I think everybody's familiar with that term.
Mm,
Nothing new under the sun.
mm,
It's just, methods which I found after several years worked for me, and I had no idea if actually people would find these techniques. I have had, of course, one or two people uh, who joined some of my workshops when I used to still do them live. I don't do
yeah.
them anymore. Um, and then they would say, "Oh, it hasn't really worked," or maybe,
Mm,
and always after a little bit of discussion, maybe listening to how they went about things, maybe they followed the steps. All my steps to the T, and it didn't work,
mm,
or maybe they'd changed it slightly. There's always a way through it, but yeah, essentially, all the things that I've learned about sigils, about servitors,
yeah.
obviously I had to learn them from other sources,
Mm,
but then you inject. This is what I always say to people: your when you inject your own, you put your own little flair on it, and you really
yeah.
truly make it
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
own. That's when the magic happens.
Yeah. Well, I was just reflecting on that kind of in the run up to preparing for today, and there's as you said, there's plenty of resources out there of how to kind of employ servitors into whatever you need them to do. Um, but it is that little tweaks, those kind of nuanced bits of like, well, you've got all this experience of actually working with your own servitors, and that comes through in that course. It's those little bits that you only gain from experience, you only gain from doing, and that I found really helpful and really kind of just worked for me, I have to say. Um, so, what else have you been up to?
Oh, okay. So, what have I been up to lately? Well, a little, well, no, not a little, quite a big hiccup recently in my personal life, but, throwing myself back into all sorts of stuff. Funnily enough, when these big things happen in our lives, it kind of, at least in my experience, it really propels you to sort of just go excuse my language, fuck it and just try it and just,
Yeah.
do everything and get, don't procrastinate and just think. Because I've had Abramelin squares on my list of to-dos forever. And that's one of the things I'm currently experimenting with. So I came across Abramelin squares like most people, if, when they started reading books back in the day. And, I saw them and I thought, that's interesting. I wasn't much of a mathematician. I still am not. So when I first came across them when I was much younger, in my late teens, I thought, it's numbers, I'm not going to get it, move on. But recently I've been rereading the Grimoire Abramelin the Mage, or Abramelin the Magus, and the squares sort of started calling out to me.
Okay.
So that's one of I'm sort of neck deep in that work at the moment. And I'm also reworking through Al-Toukh's, or Al-Toukh, I should use the correct pronunciation there, Al-Toukh's Grimoire of Harut and Marut.
Yeah. That absolutely fascinates me, the Harut and Marut stuff. I was reading up again, kind of in preparation for today, and so interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because it's I think it's just presented in a way that's like, here are the steps, this is what you do, this is the sigil, and these are the names. Of course, with my, I'm going to say, fairly extensive experience with working with the djinn, I also added some elements which I cobbled together from other experiences, other workings, to make it my own. But the Harut and Marut Grimoire is absolutely fascinating. Quite difficult to come by. I had to go on eBay a few times to have a look at copies. And Ishtar Publishing, I should say, they brought out a copy in 2014. There are older copies which have not been translated into English. So you can get ones in Arabic, in Persian, Farsi, in Urdu. But it wasn't until 2014, I believe, might be wrong here, that there was an earlier English version, but it wasn't very good.
Right.
So the Ishtar Publishing one is pretty complete, in my opinion.
Yeah, fantastic. And for listeners who aren't familiar with this particular area, could you give them a kind of an overview of the work?
Yeah. Okay. So well, the grimoire itself is it's basically a book of spells, and it is written, or it's attributed to a very mysterious character called I don't even know what his first name is, but he goes by the name Al-Toukh, Toukhi, and he allegedly was an Egyptian sorcerer, and allegedly in his time, so we're talking first half of the 20th century, he printed over 30 books in Arabic, sort of dealing with various occult material, summoning jinn. I think he wrote treatises on Arabic healing magic. I think in the sort of the tradition of previous philosophers, he also wrote about sort of Islamic philosophy. But this particular book, which he wrote, deals only with magical spells,
Right.
which very much hearken to. A lot of them feel very like the Greek magical papyri type spell. There's a lot to intone, to incant. There's usually a sigil. There are words of power to use. So to sum it up in a nutshell, it's an Arabic magic grimoire.
Fantastic. And I was looking at the kind of some of the mythology around those figures, the two angels.
Yes.
Harut and Marut, which is all very fascinating.
Really fascinating. I mean, again, one can only really speculate as to whether they're really angels or not, because I've never seen the names Harut and Marut outside of outside the Quran. However, we do have variations of their names, the fallen angels, in the Torah, but their names are not Harut and Marut. They're a longer name. I can't remember what they are. But the essential story is that they were two angels that had fallen to earth, and they were bringing that, in one version, according to which school of Islam you follow, they were fallen angels that had turned to devils that then were offering humanity the chance to learn sihir, black magic, and sorcery. So sihir is the word for black magic. And then in other schools of Islam, like the Sufis believe that they were not fallen angels, but just simply angels that were passing on magical knowledge to the human race.
Yeah.
So whatever you believe, it doesn't really matter because the spells fucking work. They are amazing. And I suppose I maybe should say this because one must say it. If anybody's interested in doing that type of work, you can definitely pick up the book. You can go through it and literally just pick up a love spell. The book itself is 90% love spells, but there are spells for causing a hemorrhage in an enemy. There are, I call them spells, but they're more like rituals. There are rituals there are no rituals to bring money, which is a little bit of a downer for me, but you know. But there are a few rituals mainly to know your enemy's plans, things like that. But yeah, 90% of the grimoire is love spells. But my advice, and this is just a, friendly warning, your listeners can completely disregard this if they don't feel it. But whilst the grimoire itself can be worked alone by itself, I believe because Al-Toukh published all of his 30-odd manuscripts and books, I believe there's a lot, and if you work with the djinn as well, you'll know that there's a lot of preparation to do beforehand, and there are certain things to do afterwards. So what I'm trying to say basically is you can take the spell at face value and try it, but it's better to know a little bit more about the history, about how you summon djinn, how you can call upon certain words of power. There's the infamous Bahatia conjuration, which takes about an hour to actually say. So I don't do that. I don't do the full Bahatia. I just, I do a much condensed version. And then there are the calling of the djinn elders, the 7 djinn kings. So basically what I'm trying to say is, yes, you can use the spells, but just do some background check. Maybe just get up to speed on a lot of, because it's highly ritualistic. It's also very animalistic, but there are just, for lack of a better word, there are conventions when you're working with the djinn. So there is this very popular, I don't know if it's a theory, but there is this popular understanding, and I say popular within the Islamic text, that jinn can't actually hear the call of the magician or anybody unless you go through a hierarchy. So I'm sure you know this from other systems of magic, where you start with the big guy and then you go all the way down to the djinn you actually want to call. Or sometimes in other hierarchies, you go from the lowest and then you work your way up to the main djinn. It's the same thing here.
Fascinating. It sounds extraordinary, and I think your gentle warning is should be taken on board by my listeners. These things are formulaic for very precise reasons, very significant reasons, and the djinn are not to be taken lightly. And with your work, I know you've done an awful lot of work with the djinn of late, and you mentioned that you've had some really kind of startling results. And one of the things I found really interesting is how you mentioned that they're different in their feel or in how they deliver results from kind of other kind of groups of spirits, like the Goetia, that kind of thing that you've worked with previously. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, no, definitely, of course. Right. Well, I can definitely say this. There are several, I'm sure, and I've come across so many people that have messaged me, or I've seen in forums that I occasionally visit. Everybody's scared shitless of djinn, and they should be. There is a reason why they are so frightening. And please excuse my language, but seriously, they can fuck you up. So there's this delicate balance, I believe, as a magician one must take. I suppose in, like, for example, in the Goetia, we are used to, at least the way I do it, you take on power, you assume high authority, and you perhaps use the angels to constrain them, and then you command from a place of power. With the djinn, it's not usually advisable to bully and command. I won't use the word bully because I don't really even bully the demons. I just politely command. But with the djinn, it is vastly different. So there are horror stories about, djinn hauntings and how they are very difficult to get rid of. Yes. They feel very volatile is probably a good way to put it. That's a nice way to put it. Their energy can be very frightening. I will not lie. I will not sit here and lie to you and say that I have not shat my pants, at least on one djinn summoning occasion, because the thing is, you're doing it in the dark, no lights on, with a couple of candles and a djinn bowl, and your mind starts playing tricks on you. But then when you're calling out these ancient names of the 7 djinn, and things are going down because you start hearing things, you start hallucinating. I've had several times this particular experience where I'll be taking on authority and power and using certain words from the Bharatiya. But by the way, for your listeners, the Bharatiya conjuration is attributed to an Arab philosopher and magician called Al-Buni. But I don't think he's the one who actually wrote it. It's cobbled together from much older sources, but basically the whole Bharatiya conjuration is this long text of seemingly random words, which are all words of power to command the jinn, and supposedly, according to some texts and authorities, the very words that King Suleiman al-Dawood used in order to construct his temple. So in English, King Solomon. They are dangerous, and that's not me trying to be, look at me, I can command jinn. No. But they are dangerous. I have had more than one sleepless night after working with them. But there's a redeeming thing. Once you do push through the fear, and we've spoken about this before because I've spoken to you many times about my personal experiences with them, but it's almost like a test. Except the test never gets easier. You never stop feeling. You never stop feeling absolutely like you're gonna, like the contents of your dinner are just gonna go straight out as soon as you start calling them. That never goes away. But the way you handle yourself gets easier. But and here's the thing, that's only with some jinn.
Right.
There are other jinn that don't deal with humans for their own reason, and you might find that they can sort of fuck you up a bit.
That makes an awful lot of sense. And like we've been talking and kind of on my Patreon about like night work, well, what I call night work in my practice anyway, which is, even though it's like sometimes it will involve calling a ritual work, absolutely, but it's the same thing. It's the same kind of test of metal, because you're either doing or you're simulating like life or death stuff, and your body has that reaction,
Absolutely. But you're staring off. I'm like you said, you're doing it at night. Presumably you haven't got much like in the way of light, like probably the candles or whatever, or you're doing it out in the open in the middle of a forest. I am personally quite the scaredy cat. It's such an ironic thing to say when in reality I'm the one summoning demons and jinn in the middle of the night. But in real life, I cannot watch horror films. I cannot even read thrillers or anything because they scare the shit out of me. But then I go and do something like this where
I kind of get that. Like I used to love horror films. Like when I was a teenager, I used to love them. Horror books, horror films, all the time, right? And like much like yourself, been out in the on a lonely moor at midnight, calling the dark one, and which similar experience, fucking hell. Have I been when you do it,
do it because you're there for a reason. You're there, and you're right. You get to that point where it's almost like a fight or flight. Do you stop the ritual? If you have the control, you can stop it. but then I guess that is the true test of one's mettle, because you push through regardless of the fear. And like I said, because people will attribute the same feelings, like when you work with the demons and you summon the Goetia, that intense feeling of fear. I don't feel that anymore. I've worked with them for so long that it's almost like greeting. I won't use the word friend, but people like colleagues.
Yeah.
Not with all of the demons, but with some of them. But again, like I said, with the djinn, that feeling of fear actually never goes away when you're doing the ritual. So you hold it at bay as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
There is a moment where perhaps there's a stillness when you get to the apex of the ritual. And yeah, you're not constantly thinking, fuck, I need to stop. You get to the point where you're there to make a polite request. So you just got to,
Good. Yeah. And at that point of stillness, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, the air stops moving.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really quite something. I haven't used a huge amount of grimoires. Like a lot of my stuff has been visionary. I have done some grimoire work, but I'm not robustly versed in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I kind of want to delve into more, and kind of look at a lot more of kind of the formulaic approach to engaging with spirits. Because sometimes what I found is that sometimes I'll get loads. I get a lot. It'll come through real easy, real easy, and then it'll stop. And there's times when it stops that I need it. But I won't be able to get it. Like it'll just go it'll switch off. Mm-hmm. So there's part of me that kind of wants to explore, well, how do I get more kind of rounded in grimoire sense so I can kind of bridge those gaps.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm also thinking, well, absolutely, that's definitely worth exploring, certainly as a scholarly pursuit and a practical one. But at the same time, those moments of when there's withdrawal and quiet are probably when I'm being forced to concentrate on something or develop something, part of my relationship with the spirits that I work with. But definitely that's something that I'm going to look at. So, which is why I love talking to you about this stuff. Now, which way do you want to go? Do you want to talk more about djinn?
I've been having a lot more djinn encounters outside of rituals.
Yes.
This year has been ridiculous.
Yeah.
One I want to actually talk about with you today, if that's okay, is one that happened about 3 months ago. So in order to tell this account, I actually need to explain a little bit about what I do. It's a casual job. It's not one of my main jobs, as it were. And basically, I facilitate doctors, nurses, and any other type of medical staff who want to immigrate to countries like Canada, America, England, the UK, from subcontinent countries like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, places like that, and occasionally some countries from the Middle East. So I'm trained to assess them, as it were. I assess their knowledge, and basically the ultimate aim is to see if they have the technical medical knowledge for the application, the job that they're applying for. It's a lot of fun because you get to sit in individual meetings for about 15 to 20 minutes, and you assess them, you listen to them, you ask them relevant questions. It's fun. It's not my main job. It just passes the time on the odd Saturday when I happen to not be doing much. But this time, oh my God. So I was getting ready. It was, I was about 2 or 3 candidates in. So I'd already had, my first one, and it was just going pretty slowly. And then my next candidate walked in mid-late 40s, by the looks of her name and also by the way she was dressed in her ethnic clothing. She was Indian. Pakistani, because she had an Islamic name, a Muslim name. And my God, from the moment she came in, Dara, something was definitely wrong with this lady. there was just something off about her. Now, I want to impress upon your listeners that it's part of my job. I have to interact with them, talk to them, ask them relevant questions, and I can't leave the room. So you're basically locked into this 20-minute meeting inside a room with this person. There was something off about their eyes. They looked too flat. And if anybody knows what I mean, they'll just get it immediately. There was movement, but there was no movement. And I shit you not, Dara, the entire 20 minutes, she did not blink once. Yes, exactly. It gives you the heebie-jeebie creepies.
Oh, God, yeah.
So she came in, she sat down, and immediately one of my servitors was going off in my head saying, kind of like, danger, danger, danger. I didn't feel I was in danger, but it was definitely a warning sign. So as I was speaking to her, I was setting up my wards, calling up some more servitors, and just sort of generally getting myself into a more defensive position. Nothing happened. There wasn't even any recognition that I could see from the djinn, because that's what I assumed she was when she was interacting with me. There was no recognition that, this is a grand magus woman. No, there was none of that. We carried out the interview as usual. But it's like a scene in a movie. You know, like when they had that scene where the character is speaking to somebody, but you can hear their inside thoughts at the same time. And I was just getting this cacophony of... And then I had my servitors talking to me as well. The way she moved, her neck, it was very disjointed. It was as if, to just say it, she looked like she was being possessed by something that didn't know how to move like a human. Oof, creepy.
Yeah.
So basically, by the end of the interview, we finished it. Thank you very much. And then they left. But we already know from human psychology and behavioral science that even looking at someone for more than a minute is uncomfortable. Yeah. Can you imagine being in an interview with someone for 20 minutes where, you know, like how we would naturally look down or look away or focus on none of that. She looked dead into my eyes and there was nothing moving. There was nothing at all moving. And it was very uncomfortable. After she left, I just had to sort of leave the room and ground and center. It was
yeah. Well, I mean, like I like that sounds really intense. I can imagine how full on that felt. But like, I think we spoke about it before. Like when I was in Old Delhi, and we'll get to your recent adventures in Delhi, in Nizamuddin Alia, that tomb in there.
Yeah,
that's the one that came up in my dream. Like about a month beforehand, I went where I saw that kind of individual in a white hat turn to me with the decomposed face, saying, "Don't come here." And I went there, and there was, when I was taken to the area where people with djinn problems were held, waiting for treatment. There's an individual in a white hat eyeballing me, staring straight at me, and just mouthing off. And I've never really been frightened to take a photograph before, but I was then. I really was. Like, in fact, I only really took the photograph because I was embarrassed not to take it in front of my fixer, you know. Well, yeah, that whole thing about being eyeballs, and then the minute I put the camera up, just stopped dead. Nothing, you know. It's so disconcerting. I mean, it doesn't sound as intense. I mean, I wasn't across the table. I was thinking it was a good distance for me. Like, I can imagine how you were like that meter, you know.
Exactly. You know that feeling when you just know. And like, you know, people could easily have looked at that situation and said, well, and people did. Someone messaged me about it because I'd put it up, and they said something like, you know, it could have been a trick of the light or something like that. Yeah, sure, it could have. But when you've been in this game for long enough, and you just know, like the way you know if a spell has been successful or not, you just know. And the first thought I had, wait, I forgot. When she left the room, I have to say, these interviews take place in busy educational centers. Usually you have to speak extra loud for the microphone that's recording the interview because there are so many people milling around outside. From the moment she came in to the moment she left, and I hadn't even noticed until she closed the door behind me, and suddenly all the noise came back into the room again. It was like I was visibly like, and I took a moment. I had to take a break. I called my supervisor and I just said, you know what, I need a timeout for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
But then my thought was, like you probably were thinking with this djinn that you saw, my thought was, what were they doing there? What the hell was this supposed djinn doing if we imagine that the jinn are far beyond us in terms of being able to,
Mm-hmm.
according to the Quran, appear and disappear in the blink of an eye, why the hell is it doing efficiency exam as a doctor to immigrate to Canada? It was very surreal. And then of course I laughed, and then I was like, well, they've got their own business.
This is it. Yeah. It's beyond comprehension,
For us, yeah, it's beyond.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Speaking of India, you were in Delhi. Was it start of this year or tail end of last year?
No, this year. It was just this year. Yeah. I was there in early January for a wedding. Oh, sorry. Beginning of February. It wasn't January, it's February.
Yeah.
And I was in Delhi. It was an amazing experience. I didn't actually move very far on the days that in the mornings, because the wedding, as you know, probably the weddings there like take up a week.
They're the absolute best.
They are, but
so much fun.
So much food, so much dancing, so much drinking, and you have little energy for much else during the morning before you have to go off to another part of the wedding in the evening. But on the second day I arrived, I ended up going to now you're going to have to remind me how to say this. Was it the Shah Kotla?
Feroz Shah Kotla.
That's it. I don't know why it doesn't stick in my head. Renowned 13th century? No, must be later. Mughal.
Yeah, 50. So it's what's the capital of Firozabad?
That's it.
And
so, what century are we talking? 14th, 15th. When the Mughals came.
It's when the Mughals. So yeah, it's definitely Mughal. But I think the thing that throws that off is that it's got an Ashketan pillar on the top.
Yes, it does throw that. It's confusing. It's like, what period is this? Anyways,
that's super old. Like that's over 2,000 years old, I think.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I think I don't know very much about this history of that, but I think the Feroz, I think it was Feroz Shah Kotla, who must have taken that from a temple and then just put it there in the center and was like, this is Islamic now.
Basically, yeah.
Fool that he was. No, you know this as much as I do. The fort itself is actually known for being the hub of djinn activity. So anyways, I decided to go there on the second morning. It was after a very boozy night before. Very boozy, so perhaps my judgment was a little bit... anyways, so I took a little rickshaw. It was only about 15 minutes from this hotel that I was staying in. Massive hotel, which was all being funded by the groom's family. So
fantastic!
I didn't have to pay a thing, but got hopped on this little rickshaw. The rickshaw man was confused because my knowledge of Hindi is very limited to a few certain words, and obviously because I'm brown, he just assumed I was Indian. So that was confusing. I just had to lie and say, no, I'm from the south of India. As you know, they don't speak Hindi.
Yeah.
So I just lied and said, no, sorry, South India. No. Anyways, managed to drop me off. Funnily enough, the English cricket team were playing in the stadium just across.
That's right. There's a massive cricket stadium next door to it. Yeah.
And went in, paid my little fee of £1 whole pound, whatever it was. I also got I got the local.
I was about to say you definitely got the local discount.
I got the local price because I just basically again said, no, I'm visiting from the south of India. I'm an Indian woman. Because I don't know if your listeners know, but there's two prices: one for foreigners, one for locals.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's at every single site though. Is it?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. If it's within the kind of the heritage bodies,
Okay. Yeah.
That it's official policy, basically that these sites are the heritage of the Indian people. The fees on the door are what maintains them. So that's it. And for foreigners coming, it's a little bit of a tourist tax.
I get it, and it was well worth going in. So what really drew me to going there was because I'd read about how local Indians from all across the city go there every Thursday in the evening to light lamps. Obviously, not lamps like electric lamps, but you know what I mean, like old-fashioned lamps with the oil. They offer things like milk, bread, sometimes honey. And it's all towards. Oh, and what's really cool is that they write letters to the Jinn
Yeah.
ambassador, I think the title is. They call him the Jinn ambassador because there's the Jinn assembly and then there's the head Jinn of this fort, apparently, and then all the little lesser Jinn. And I went during the day and on a day which wasn't a Thursday, so I didn't see any of that. But walking around was quite the experience. I reached out mentally to whatever head of the Jinn was of that fort. I asked for permission to move forward with my senses open.
Yeah.
And then I felt this nod of agreement or nod of like, yes, you may pass. And then I felt like the whole time I was there exploring the site, it was just me in this in this huge complex. And I felt like I had an entourage of Jinn in front, behind, and to each side of me. And yeah, it's one of those memories that I'll never forget because I had the whole place to myself. It was searing hot. I managed to snap some pictures, which I put up on Instagram of some of the offerings people had left. I believe the people who look after and maintain the site actually remove the letters that people write. I don't know what they do with them, but they do leave the offerings because, of course, no one wants to upset the Jinn and no one wants to take away their offerings.
Yeah.
But, wow, what an amazing experience! I'll never forget it.
Yeah, it really is an incredible place. There was a flash rainstorm when I was there.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was already on edge, So
it's one of those countries where you have to really be there to experience these. It's such the next place I was just speaking to you about this before we went live, which is I'm going back after the monsoon season, which is around the end of I'm going to go around the end of September, beginning of October, with a little bit of luck to Jaipur. And you mentioned going to explore.
There's the Amber Fort, which is the big kind of castle fortress there, and there's the Palace of Winds.
Oh, that's right.
And there's also there's the outside there's the observatory there as well. But I honestly I mean Jaipur is nice. There's a big jewelry trade there as well. But Jodhpur and Jaisalmer are lovely. Or there's a tiny little, if you've got a little bit more time, there's a tiny little town called Bundi out in the middle of nowhere, which is fantastic.
I've got my sights on. Hopefully, I've got my sights on going to Varanasi, where they do
wonderful.
Was it the Ganga, the River Ganges festival every year?
Yeah, and they do there's a daily puja to Anji, the fire god, on the banks of the Ganges. Well, obviously we'll exchange. We'll catch up before you go, and I'll give you the location of some of the temples that I went, because there's a couple of Agori temples that I went to when I met the Agori out there. Some of them are quite tricky to find. Some of them are very easy to find. Got giant cement skulls outside them, but which is a giveaway.
I definitely to put on my list of places to see. Yes,
but definitely worth your while. Definitely worth your while. Yeah, it's such a tremendous place. Oh God, make me think about traveling now.
I mean, I've got all these places I've committed myself and done a lot of magic to go to, and I just need to. I need to go. I need to go back there. And obviously, from where I live, my home city in the Middle East, it's very easy to get to. It's literally just one short flight over the Gulf, the Persian. No, wait, where am I located? In the one short flight over the Persian Sea. That's it, or
Lovely.
what they call the Persian Sea, and then India. It is absolutely magical. A lot of poverty, which was not surprising but
Mhm.
heartbreaking. But I visited a lot of temples while I was in Delhi. Just magical places. I mean,
Mm.
even if one is not spiritual, I'm not particularly spiritual, but I acknowledge the power that these places contain. You know, you imagine
Mm.
pilgrims going there for, in some cases, for centuries
Yeah.
before British arrived. And I
Oh
went,
yeah.
oh, you'll love this. I
Mm.
went past this tiny rinky dink makeshift shack looking temple. And it wasn't, and it was one of the last days I was there. Funny enough, I was actually looking for an Islamic tomb, but
Mm.
I ended up finding this rinky-dink tiny Mickey Mouse shack. And the only way I knew it was a temple was because outside there was a sort of like a mural painting to, I don't know which god it was. I think it was Shiva. But as I went through this tiny rinky-dink place, I came out to this courtyard, and this temple looked like I mean, it was like, where am I? You know, have I gone back about 2000 years
Oh, I love
pre
that.
British
Yeah.
colonial times? It was absolutely mind blowing. Spend a little bit of time in there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gotta go
Wonderful.
back.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
Wonderful.
Let's just
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. The ice. Oh, no. Oh, God, I'm getting the real travel bug now thinking about that. Um,
That's again.
yeah, so much fun. So much wonderful, wonderful thing to do. Really, really loved it. Um, Now, shall we talk about a more serious subject?
So this conversation actually originally came about only yesterday when I was speaking
Mm.
to you, because recently in the local news from where I'm from, there was a news article about how three men and one woman had been accused and tried of witchcraft, performing black magic, and then I believe the three men were sentenced to life in prison and the woman was executed. Um, and I have to actually preface this by saying that these stories nowadays, you used to hear about them a lot more back in the
Mhm.
day when I was growing up in this country.
Yeah.
These days, it's almost unthinkable to hear this type of story. But
Right.
if you it wasn't a main story, it wasn't a front page story, but it was just there at the back of the newspaper. It caught my eye because they were talking about, the title was something sensational like four black magicians found guilty and da da da. In terms of the region, the country I'm from is actually considered very liberal, um, but there is a hard line drawn, and if you cross that line in terms of being accused or being found with certain objects that contain obviously magical symbols and elements, if you're caught doing any of that stuff, jail time is for sure going to happen, and
Mhm.
you could very well be executed.
Mhm.
It's a reality that I've had to reckon with my whole life. Um, so this leads us to this question that you said, and rightly so. We may be, we may have these silly conversations and arguments online with others, but at least we're able to discuss it
Mhm.
openly without the fear of, we may fear being judged or being discovered, but there is never this fear of someone who's practicing magic, for example, in England.
Yeah.
There's never going to be the fear that the authorities are going to come, take them away,
Yeah.
and basically it's like, before the witch trial, well, during the witch trials, where you'd basically be accused without any evidence, and that's
Mhm.
it. You'd
Mhm.
be executed. That's really how that conversation kind of came up yesterday. So addressing it, I think, is an important point now.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think it is. It, it's a very, very good. I don't know, it's a well needed perspective. I think it's an
Sobering.
important. Yeah, absolutely sobering. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, like I mean, broadly speaking, you're just seen as a curiosity in kind of most Western countries.
True.
There are some areas where um, the description of being kind of a magician or a witch or whatever one describes oneself may still have potency. You know, if you start talking about kind of some of the more famous spirits, shall we say, that still has kind of an echo of potency. But equally, there's still not that kind of life or death impact. Which is something we need to be very grateful of.
Well, let's just say it.
Mm.
In all of the Western Hemisphere, including the Americas, it's not illegal to practice magic. It's
Yeah.
probably very much frowned upon.
Hmm.
I can imagine, and this is something I can only imagine. But come on, Dara, you can't sit there and tell me that there are little small insular villages in Ireland where, if you go around saying I'm a witch or I'm a magician, people are obviously gonna ostracize you at the
Oh
very least.
yeah,
Maybe even drive you out of town. No?
but they'll react to you.
Yeah.
Definitely react to you. I mean, I understand why. Particularly if strange stuff starts happening, right? But it's you might get run out of town or ostracized or
Whatever.
whatever.
But the law protects you because
Exactly.
it is technically the freedom of expression and religion and
Hmm.
free thought and
Yeah.
all that. Where I come from,
Mhm.
that is not the law. The law
Yeah.
states that because it is not a separation of church and state,
Yeah.
the dominant religion in this case
Yeah.
is the government. So any law that is decreed is both a religious and a secular law. It is all intertwined.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, basically, it's something I've had to contend with my whole life. So I learned a few precious uh, uh, techniques for making sure that I'm not detected.
Yeah.
And again, I really do want to kind of say this. It is a liberal enough country where I live and grew up. It was a lot less liberal when I was growing up, but it is now
Yeah.
quite a liberal place. We're not Saudi Arabia, so that's not where I come from.
Yeah.
Where, that sort of thing happens all the time.
Yeah. For people who want to reach out or follow you, where's the best place for them to do so?
Instagram, but I do also have a Threads profile, which you can see that little badge up in my Instagram. Everybody's on Threads now. It's like the mini blogging of it. Well, it's Twitter, but not.
Not me, because I'm a miserable middle-aged man. That's
Well, it's fun. You know what? I actually recommend it. It's kind of fun. Before Twitter decided to sue Instagram for doing it and then taking it down, it is actually kind of fun. But yes, I'm primarily on Instagram. In fact, that's the only place I am on. And then I do have a Threads account where I do post daily stuff. There is also my Feroz Club, which is
of course, yeah.
And I do want to make a quick mention about that. So people always message me asking me what it's all about. It is sort of like a patron-esque community. I have released since January a shit ton of audios on various magical practices, all from my own experience, of course, and all from my home city. So that's fun I go for long walks out in the desert so people can't hear me. And that's a true thing as well. I put my audios right out in the back of where my home is, and it's in the desert, so no one's around to hear me talk. And I also have recently released 2 of my own personal servitors, which Dara, you are one of my first.
That's right. Yeah.
Both of them. So I offer that to all of my members. I also offer a free monthly card reading for every month that they're subscribed. Completely free. It's a 15-minute general reading on the inquiry of their choice, and that's it. Yeah, and I upload lots of interviews. Dara, you were one of the first people on my.
I was. Yeah.
I can't call it a podcast because it's not a podcast, but yeah, and everything's happening there. I post a lot of material which I would never post on my Instagram there. So if you're interested, follow the link in my Instagram bio.
Fantastic. I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes. Well, it's been absolutely lovely to catch up with you again and have you back on the show. Fantastic conversation, illuminating and engaging as always. And you're obviously welcome back anytime.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Darren.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, Mademoiselle Vendredi. It was an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show for the third time. Do check out Mademoiselle Vendredi's workshop. The links are in the show notes. It's definitely one that you're gonna wanna get on. All right, that is it from me. I'm Darren Mason. You've been listening to the Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.